Hello, book lovers. Welcome to Must Love Books. Hello, and welcome back to Must Love Books podcast. Today, I am here with a returning author to the podcast, Tatiana Schlote-Bonne, who was here for her debut, Such Lovely Skin, last year and is back for a brand new horror, The Mean Ones. Tatiana, hi, how are you?
Hi, Crystal. I'm good. How are you?
I am doing great. I'm so happy to have you back on the pod, and
Yeah,
I'm
me
glad that
too.
we've been able to make it work. 'Cause we're like, book release, wrapping up the podcast season. Like, we've both been so crazy busy that I'm glad we've finally managed to squeeze each other in.
Yeah, we really have been busy. And I'm so excited seeing how well your podcast has been doing, all the exciting things you've been promoting and authors you've had on. So I'm really excited that you were able to fit me back in.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I honestly, I just cannot believe how much the podcast has grown. Less than 2 years in, and just this year alone, 2025, I have more than doubled our listeners, which is so incredible. And I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. It means so much to me and to all of our guests, such as yourself.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. Congrats.
So, we are here today for The Mean Ones, which released at the end of September, another horror thriller by Tatiana. And I think everyone is really going to like this one, especially. Well, actually, you know what? I'll let you dive in and tell us a little bit about this new novel. And
So this is an adult folk horror and it's dual timeline. So we're following Sadie in adulthood. She is a power lifter, a physical therapy assistant. She's really attached to her routine. And 17 years ago, she survived a cult murder. And so in adulthood, she's living this secret identity because she doesn't want anyone to know that she was the survivor of the summer camp cult sacrifice. And so our dual timeline is about summer camp 17 years ago and what went down and how Sadie ended up where she is today.
I love it so much. And before we get into your writing inspirations, we have to talk about this cover. I love the cover of The Mean One so much. I remember when you first did the reveal several months ago, and I was immediately obsessed.
Yeah, I love the cover too. The artwork is by Crumbs and Gubs is her handle. You can tag her when you post this. I followed her art for a long time. So it was really cool that when my publisher reached out to her, she was able to say yes and we commissioned her. Because I've been such a fan of her art for forever. And it's so funny because I was like playing around in like the Paint app on my computer drawing stick figures and like antlers growing out of eyes in like a really bad way. And that's one of the cool things about working with a small publisher is they are able to really take my feedback in the direction that I want and apply it. Whereas I know at a lot of big publishers, sometimes the cover that they come up with is the cover you get, and that's it. Crumbs and Gubs brought the vision to life in a way that I'm obsessed with too. And we settled on this pink background and font to really capture the girlhood and feminist vibes of the story.
Which is just super fun, honestly. It kind of gives me this story, and I thought this even from when I first saw the cover. Have you watched Yellow Jackets?
hmm I had to have been drafting or like tinking around with the concept when I watched the first season because that was like 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah, so that show definitely inspired me.
So if you are a fan of Yellow Jackets, I know Yellow Jackets was hugely popular. I know people are still talking about it, people are still watching it. So if you liked Yellow Jackets, at all. Anything about Yellow Jackets, if you liked it, I think you would really love The Mean Ones because we've got the horror, we've got some thriller aspects, and then there's that undertones of girlhood, which I think really ties the whole story in together.
Well, thank you.
You're so welcome. And then, of course, the paranormal aspects are always super fun.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about your writing process for The Mean Ones.
I wrote this book when my agent was on submission with Such Lovely Skin. So while we were waiting to hear if we were going to get a book deal for that one or not, I was deep in drafting this. And part of that the advice is when you're trying to get a book deal for one book, just like write the next one. And I really do try to follow that advice because it is the only thing that can keep me functioning. Otherwise, I'm just obsessing over the rejections and what's going to happen. So at the time, we went on submission with Such Lovely Skin. I was kind of burnt out on the tech horror, and Such Lovely Skin was like heavier. It was dealt a lot with sadness and grief and forgiveness. And I wanted to write something a little edgier and like a little grittier. And I was still thinking about, I kind of write about the same things a lot, about trauma and surviving and becoming stronger. I do still write about those things, but I wanted to tell it in a different way. And I was just consuming all of the horror. I read The Ritual, watched the movie adaptation, was watching Midsummer a few times. That's one of my favorite movies. And I was thinking about how in those films, those stories, we experience the cult sacrifice for the first time along with the characters. And I was thinking, what about after? What if one of these side characters who's watched all this go down in the Midsummer cult sacrifice, what's their life like 20 years after this whole thing? So that's how I started playing around with the dual timelines. And then I was also playing around with a protagonist who can't say no, learns to say no. And
Learns
I
to
was also
scream no.
Yes, 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 yes. And along those lines, I was thinking, well, what if I wrote about powerlifter? Because, I'm the buff writer on social media. I do lots of weightlifting. I coach weightlifting, powerlifting. And I was thinking, what if I wrote about a powerlifter, someone who's strong on the outside, but weak on the inside? External strength, no internal strength. She needs to develop that internal strength to match her external. That's kind of how my process goes for all my books. I like play around with all these different kernels until I find a way that they fit together into a story.
I have to say that's one of my favorite things about this book is Sadie learning to really use her power and how she just grows from this timid, scared on the inside girl
Hmm.
and really just envelops herself in the feminine rage and lets it just kind of take over as she just grows and goes
Yeah.
absolutely feral.
Yes. It was really cathartic to write. And something else I was thinking about. I mean, obviously, I love a badass female main character. I like to think of myself as one in my real life, but I wasn't born this way. And a lot of times when I do read a book and, we start off with that like snarky, really strong main character, I'm wondering like, well, how did this person get to be this way? I, in my life, at least had to go through a few shitty relationships and be this person, kept trying to mold myself into being other people before I figured out who I was. And so I did want to tell that story and start in a place where Sadie's still figuring herself out and is really submissive and like just trying to be this massive people pleaser and kind of doormat, which was really frustrating to write. Um, but I felt it made the payoff more worth it to see her reach that breaking point.
I agree. It does make the payoff more worth it because this is a very character-driven story, whereas a lot of horror is often driven by the plot. In order to
Hmm.
execute, no pun intended, the horror elements, they're very driven by the narratives behind the actual horror. And this, we still have all of those elements of horror, but it is so deeply rooted in the character's arc that you
Hmm.
kind of experience this horror in a much deeper way, I would say.
Well, good. I'm so glad that worked for you. I like to think of all my writing as deeply character driven. And one thing I was very committed to doing with the story is that Sadie can save herself at almost any point up until the end if she just does stand up for herself and learn to say no. But because she feels that she can't do that, she's actually like causing her own problems. And to me, that's where storytelling gets really compelling, is when, exactly like you said, it's the characters' internal beliefs about the world that are getting in their own way, and that's creating the plot rather than the external plot acting upon them.
And what I really loved was the dual timelines aspect of this novel. I've, seen it done in a few different ways, and the way it's executed in this novel is something that does remind me of the way the timelines are ran in Yellow Jackets, where you get little bits here and there, and
Mhm.
you get the earlier timeline in ways to help you see what clues and hints and feelings you need to evoke for what's coming up next and how they kind of tie into each other, and the two timelines really just play on each other.
I'm glad that that worked for you too, as I did spend a lot of time intricately plotting when to switch and how each one needed to be moving forward subtly but in sync with each other. That was actually pretty challenging because I actually don't really like dual timelines often when I read books. I get distracted easily and like lose where I was, or I feel committed to reading one or, over the other. And I really didn't want readers to feel that way with this one. So I knew I was going to put a lot of time into keeping them short, keeping them snappy, making sure that I transitioned right when the reader needed a little bit more like reason to go back to the other timeline.
How did you approach writing the dual timelines? Did you kind of write them just, page number wise, linear in that fashion, or did you write your timelines in a more timely linear fashion?
I knew that my timeline for both stories was taking place over just a couple days. And what I really did was my inside outline, which isn't something that I invented. That's from Blueprint for a Novel by Jenny Nash, which is an excellent craft book about writing character-driven fiction. It's basically a structure where your character makes a choice because they falsely believe something about the world. So for Sadie, for example, it's that she has to be normal in order to be loved, and that her normalness is her value. So she has to keep the cult sacrifice a secret. She has to be this people pleaser. And because of this false belief, the character makes a choice, which causes another choice. And because of that, X happens. Because of that, Y happens. So you have this cause and effect strung together by the flawed internal logic of the character. And so I wrote an inside outline for both the present and the past. And then I just looked at where did these major turning points happen and could I cut each scene at about, the 10-page mark or so to keep us flipping back at the same time. Honestly, I enter kind of like fugue state when I draft. So I'm like having trouble remembering exactly how I did it, but it was something like that.
Honestly, I think when a writer enters sort of like this fugue state of writing
Yeah.
is when we really get a very deeply immersed world.
Yeah, I'm like, I have like snippets of remembering writing the book, but not really. Maybe I'm like possessed by a demon when I write or something. It kind of feels like it.
Straight up, yeah, straight up blacking out and possession
Yes.
to write the novel. For a horror, I'd say that's very fitting.
Yeah.
That honestly, right there, is a great idea for some sort of horror
Yeah.
novel, is the author who's trying to write a book but keeps getting possessed by some entity.
Yes, that would be really frustrating, but also, I mean, if it got the book out there, like,
Right? Like,
okay.
I mean, at
Yeah.
this point, I'm willing to try anything.
Yes.
It might have to be more of a horror comedy.
Yeah, it would be a funny premise.
That is excellent. Because
Well,
I don't want to get too spoilery, but
yeah,
I truly, really did love this book.
thank you so much.
I would have to say The Mean Ones is the best horror I read of 2025.
Oh my God, that's such a huge compliment. Thank you.
You are
I'm
so
honored.
welcome. So I so recommend it for all of our listeners. I think you would love it.
Thank you.
And then you are currently, I was peeking at your Goodreads bio and I noticed another title for 2026,
Yes. So while we were trying to sell the mean ones, I was deep in drafting another manuscript.
a
The
pattern I'm
way
noticing.
Yes, the way one does. So that is an upper YA slash adult crossover horror fantasy. It's inspired by the descent, annihilation, and the world building of the anime Made in Abyss and a little bit of Attack on Titan.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, so lots of body horror, and it's a much more like adventurous story. So our premise is two teen girls take rich people on tours in the void. And the void is this massive chasm in the earth that goes 10 miles deep and it's full of treasure and fungal horrors and monsters. And I was thinking a lot about Everest and how people pay to go up Everest and be escorted. And so in my world, it's a reverse Everest. But this is also like a gritty survival world where the people who live around the void, like giving these tours to rich people who fly in is like really their only means of income. There's like kind of these messed up social dynamics and then just a ton of body horror, people getting like eviscerated by monsters. It was a lot of fun. And after I wrote the Mean Ones, because the Mean Ones pulled a lot from my personal life, there's heavy themes of childhood trauma, toxic relationships. I was like, I want to write something fun. Uh, I want to write a fun adventure romp through a cave. And it's still actually very character driven and has a lot to do with like the same things that I always write about. Girlhood, finding your inner strength, trusting yourself. Yes, but it's against a background of things that I love, like anime.
That sounds incredible. An anime-inspired adventure horror. Add it to your list for fall 2026. What feeds below? And I'll definitely have to have you back on the pod for that
Yes.
release.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about it and have you read it.
Okay, well, Tatiana, I want to thank you so much for squeezing me in. I'm so excited to celebrate the Mean Ones with you and recommend this book to all of our listeners because I really did love it. It was my favorite horror of 2025, so definitely have to recommend picking up a copy.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. It's an honor, and I'm very grateful to be here chatting with you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. This has been Must Love Books. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Patreon under @Must Love Books Podcast. Thank you and happy reading.